The Kiriji War, which lasted for about 16 years, was a revolt against Ibadan's desire to rule over other towns in Yoruba country following the decline of Oyo Empire. This write-up serves as a living pathway to the rediscovery of one of history's most chilling story of brutal repression by a once dominant and awe-inspiring Ibadan Empire and the heroic resistance of a people against a superior force that was later brought on its knees through sheer determination, bravery, and valor. The Yoruba Civil War was mainly between Western Yoruba or Ibadan and its allies like Offa, Modikik and all Oyo forces on Ibadan's side, and Eastern Yoruba, Vajisa, Ekiti, Ife and other Yoruba dominions like Igbomina, Akoko, Egbi, Kaba and the Oworo, Lokoja, Kogi State. Ibadan was fighting on 4 other fronts, making it 5 fronts, during this civil war period. The first encounter between Ibadan and the Eastern Yoruba forces was tagged Oganjolumi, Battle of Waterloo, which ended in ignominy for the Ekiti soldiers. The Jolumi War, also called the Battle of Ekara, was a battle that took place on 1st of November, 1878 in the northeast of present-day Osun State, Nigeria. It was part of the larger conflict named the Ibadan War or Ekiti-Poropo War. The forces of Ibadan defeated in detail a force of rebellious Yorubas including soldiers from Ilorin, Ekiti, Ala and Ajisa. It was this defeat that prompted the Ekiti to call on Ogdeng, a tall, fiery fellow, with shooting eyeballs of Ajisa stock, who had been reluctant to lead the Ekiti-Poropo, having had his military training in counter-insurgency and infantry at Ibadan, and was wary of leading his people against his benefactors. Ogdeng subsequently agreed to lead the Ekiti-Poropo War, which also enlisted several Yoruba dominions like Igbomina, Akoko, Egbi, Kaba and the Oworo, a Yoruba subtribe in Lokoja, Kogi State. Also, Lagos, Ajibu and Egba were said to have assisted Ekiti-Poropo against Ibadan, seen by all as a threat to their commonwealth. The Ekiti war generals held several nocturnal meetings where war strategies were reviewed and perfected. Elara Mokin in Ondo State was said to have been the headquarters of the Ekiti-Poropo Secret Service. The war was long and bitter, an epic war between 2 powerful Yoruba Confederate armies of mainly Western and Eastern Yoruba cities. Before Ibadan's encounter with the Eastern Yoruba forces, it had already become involved in another war over trade with Egba and Ajibu in 1877. During the period, Ibadan traders on their way from Porto Novo with firearms were attacked by the Egba. Ajibu also declared war against Ibadan in 1877 and this gave the Ekiti and the Ajisa their chance. Ajisa and Ekiti took advantage of this war and declared their independence in 1878. This revolt against Ibadan's rule in 1878 started with the massacre of Ibadan officials in Ajisa, Igbomina and Ekiti. Ibadan fought on 5 fronts. In the south were the Egba who confined their activities to raids and surprise attacks, also, against the Ajibu in the same south, who pitched a camp at Oru under Balegan Onifowoken, the main war at Kiriji in the east, where their forces fought a long battle against the Ekiti and Ajisa Ekiti-Poropo forces, under the command of Ogdeng, the Sariki of Ajisa, Offa in the north, where they faced the Ilorin Fulani who pitched their camp against the people of Offa, and finally at Alife where the Ife people joined the alliance against them in 1882. There had long been friction between the Ife and the Oyo settlers at Modikik. These animosities were strengthened by the war during which Ife itself was sacked by the Modikik and their Ibadan allies, and Modikik was sacked by the Ife and Ekiti. The Ibadan and Ekiti-Poropo forces faced each other at Kiriji, a few miles east of Ekara. With time, the Ekiti-Poropo gained advantage over Ibadan, which resulted from the help they received from Ekiti sow merchants. The most important factor was the supply of breech-loading rifles, much more accurate than the arms being used by the rest of the Yoruba. Defeat began to set in on Ibadan in these wars not only because the Ekiti-Poropo were better equipped but also because it had to fight on 5 fronts, also possibly because none of the Oyo forces on Ibadan's side actually wished them well. Partly, This was due to the sufferings being experienced under Ibadan's control and as a result of the arrogant attitude of Alatosa, who under normal circumstances, as head of the town, would not have gone to the battlefield. He was eventually killed at Kiriji. Despite the odds against Ibadan, having to fight on 5 fronts, it was still undefeatable along the line. Stalemate was reached, and only with the intervention of an outside force could the image of the whole Yoruba country be redeemed. Before the war ended, attempts at mediation started as early as 1879 to 80. Olofin of Oyo and the Oni of Alife were involved, but neither was trusted by the other, and Ife later joined in the fighting. The Lagos government was under instructions from London and Accra to keep out of the conflict, even though the fighting was having serious effects on the economic life of the colony. After 1885, some of the main protagonists of the war were themselves getting tired of it. Ceasefire was arranged in 1886 through the efforts of Samuel Johnson, the historian, and Charles Phillips, later the Bishop of Ondo. The parties signed a treaty in Lagos with Governor Maloney which provided for the independence of the Ekiti-Poropo towns and the evacuation of Modikik to suit Ife. This proved impossible to carry out. Ilorin refused to stop fighting in the north where it was besieging Offa. Thus the war dragged on, and the forces refused to disband. In 1893, Carter was able to set off on a tour around Yoruba land, making treaties with Oyo and Egba, and finally persuading the Ibadan and Ekiti-Poropo forces to disperse. The Egba opened the road to Ibadan and allowed the start of railway construction. After 2 final incidents, the bombardment of Oyo in 1895 and the capture of Ilorin by the Royal Niger Company in 1897, effective colonial control was established throughout most of Yoruba land. Join us on another episode next time on Africa Roots, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts.